on the third floor of an old apartment building where the paint peeled like forgotten memories, and the hallway lights flickered more often than they glowed, Areeba learned that sometimes the walls between strangers are thinner than the walls around their own guarded hearts. She had moved there with nothing but 2 suitcases, a teaching job at a nearby school, and a quiet promise to herself that she would never again allow anyone close enough to disappoint her. The building was modest, almost worn down by time, but it was affordable, and for someone rebuilding her life after years of emotional exhaustion, it felt like a safe place to begin again. On her first night, as she lay awake listening to the hum of traffic outside, she heard something unexpected through the wall to her right. It was the soft sound of someone humming a lullaby. The voice was low and slightly unsteady, as though it belonged to someone who was trying their best to stay strong. Areeba turned on her side and pressed her ear slightly closer, not out of curiosity, but because the tenderness in that voice felt strangely comforting. The humming was followed by a child's faint cough, and then a gentle whisper saying, "It's okay, I'm right here." There was a quiet patience in that reassurance that lingered in her heart long after the building fell silent. Over the next few days, she began to recognize the rhythm of life next door. Early in the morning, she would hear footsteps moving quickly, a kettle boiling, and a man's calm voice reminding a little girl not to forget her scarf. In the evenings, she would hear the scrape of a chair, the opening of what sounded like medicine bottles, and then the same steady voice telling stories about brave princesses who saved kingdoms not with swords, but with kindness. Areeba never saw them at first, but she felt as though she knew them already. One evening, as she struggled with a heavy bag of groceries at the building entrance, the door opened from inside. A tall man with tired but kind eyes held it for her. Beside him stood a small girl wrapped in a pink sweater, clutching a stuffed rabbit. "Thank you," Areeba said softly, adjusting her grip on the bag. The man smiled politely and replied, "You're welcome. We're neighbors, I think. Apartment 3B. His voice was the same voice from behind the wall. Gentle, patient, warm. "I'm Areeba. 3A, she replied. The little girl peeked at her shyly, and Areeba knelt slightly to meet her gaze. "I'm Zara," the girl whispered. Her voice was fragile but brave, like someone trying to be stronger than she felt. From that day on, the thin walls no longer held strangers. Areeba learned that the man's name was Hamza, and that Zara was his 6-year-old daughter. Zara had a chronic illness that required frequent hospital visits and constant care. Hamza worked remotely as a graphic designer, so he could stay home with her. His wife had passed away 3 years earlier, and since then, his entire world had revolved around making sure his daughter never felt alone in her pain. He spoke of his late wife with quiet respect, never bitterness, and always gratitude for the years they had shared. Areeba noticed how carefully he chose his words, especially in front of Zara, as though he understood the power of language in shaping a child's heart. Life began to weave their routines together in small, unplanned ways. Sometimes Areeba would cook extra soup and leave a portion at their door with a simple note saying, "For strength." Sometimes Hamza would fix the flickering bulb in her kitchen without being asked, saying, "No one should eat dinner in the dark." On days when Zara's condition worsened and the walls carried the sound of quiet tears, Areeba would sit on her bed and whisper prayers for a child who had unknowingly become precious to her. Slowly, without dramatic confessions or grand gestures, affection grew like a plant reaching toward light. Yet love does not bloom without testing the soil in which it grows. One afternoon, Areeba returned home to find an ambulance parked outside the building. Her heart dropped as she saw Hamza standing near it, holding Zara tightly while paramedics adjusted equipment. Zara's face was pale, and her small fingers clutched her father's shirt. Without thinking, Areeba rushed to them. "What happened?" she asked, her voice trembling. "Just a complication," Hamza replied, though his eyes revealed a storm of fear. "We're going to the hospital." Areeba placed a reassuring hand on Zara's shoulder and said softly, "You are the bravest princess I know." Zara managed a faint smile before being taken inside the ambulance. At the hospital, hours felt like years. Areeba sat beside Hamza in the waiting area, offering silent support. He did not cry, but his hands trembled as he held a prayer bead string. "I can't lose her," he whispered once, barely audible. "She's all I have." Areeba looked at him with a steadiness she did not know she possessed. "You won't," she said gently. She has your strength. In that moment, something shifted between them. It was not just sympathy or neighborly care. It was shared vulnerability, the kind that strips away fear of being seen. Zara recovered after a few difficult days, but the incident left an invisible mark on all of them. Hamza grew quieter, burdened by medical bills and exhaustion. Areeba noticed the dark circles under his eyes and the way he sometimes stared blankly at the floor. One evening, when she heard him apologizing to Zara for not being able to buy her a new storybook, something inside her ached. The next day, she visited her school's principal and volunteered for extra tutoring hours to earn additional income. She did not mention why. That weekend, she handed Hamza an envelope. "It's not charity," she insisted before he could refuse. "It's family helping family." Hamza hesitated, pride and gratitude battling within him. Finally, he accepted, his eyes glistening. "You don't know what this means," he said quietly. "I think I do," she replied. But misunderstandings have a way of creeping into even the purest intentions. A few weeks later, Areeba overheard a conversation through the thin walls. Hamza was speaking to a relative on the phone. "I can't depend on her forever," he said. "It's not fair to involve her in our problems." The words pierced her heart. She felt as though her care had been reduced to a burden. Without waiting to clarify, she withdrew. She stopped leaving food at the door. She answered conversations with polite distance. The walls that once carried warmth now echoed with silence. Hamza noticed the change immediately. He knocked on her door one evening, concern written across his face. "Did I do something wrong?" he asked. Areeba tried to maintain composure, but the hurt surfaced. "You said you don't want to depend on me. I never wanted to be a responsibility." Hamza's expression softened with understanding. "That's not what I meant," he said gently. "I meant I don't want to take advantage of your kindness. You deserve a life that isn't weighed down by our struggles." Areeba looked at him for a long moment. "Love isn't a weight," she said finally. "It's a choice." There, in the quiet hallway with peeling paint and flickering lights, honesty bridged what pride had divided. Hamza admitted he was afraid of letting someone into their fragile world, terrified of losing again. Areeba confessed that she was equally afraid of giving her heart and watching it break. Yet they both understood that fear should not be the architect of their future. Zara, listening from behind the door, suddenly appeared and wrapped her arms around Areeba's waist. "Please don't go," she whispered. In that simple plea, every doubt dissolved. Over time, their bond grew deeper, not through dramatic declarations, but through consistent presence. Areeba attended hospital appointments. Hamza attended her school's annual function and applauded proudly from the back row. Zara's laughter returned to the walls, stronger and brighter. The apartment building remained old and imperfect, but within those thin walls, a new story was being written. A year later, on a modest evening filled with fairy lights strung across the small balcony, Hamza stood before Areeba with a simple ring. "I cannot promise a life without challenges," he said, his voice steady but emotional. "But I promise you honesty, respect, and a love that chooses you every day." Areeba felt tears gather in her eyes as she thought of the journey that had brought them there, the sleepless nights, the misunderstandings, the prayers whispered through walls. "I don't need perfection," she replied softly. "I need sincerity." And with Zara clapping excitedly beside them, she said yes. Their marriage was not a grand celebration, but it was rich with meaning. Neighbors brought homemade dishes. The building's caretaker decorated the hallway with flowers. It was a reminder that love does not require luxury to be beautiful. It requires commitment, patience, and courage. Years later, when Zara's health improved and laughter filled their home more often than hospital visits, Areeba sometimes thought about the night she first heard that lullaby through the wall. She realized that what had drawn her was not curiosity, but the sound of unwavering devotion. Thin walls had revealed a story next door, but it was love that had opened the door completely. Their journey taught them that relationships are not built on grand promises alone, but on everyday sacrifices that often go unseen. It taught them that misunderstandings can either build walls or strengthen bridges, depending on how honestly we face them. Most importantly, it showed them that love is not about rescuing someone from their struggles, but about standing beside them as they face those struggles together. In a world where people often guard their hearts behind thick emotional barriers, Areeba and Hamza discovered that sometimes it is the thin walls, the shared vulnerabilities, the overheard prayers, the unfiltered moments that allow us to truly see one another. And when we choose to respond with patience instead of fear, with respect instead of pride, we find that the story next door might just become the most beautiful chapter of our own lives. The moral of their story is simple yet powerful. Never underestimate the quiet strength of kindness, the healing power of patience, and the courage it takes to love again after loss. Life's walls may be thin, but if our hearts are open, they can reveal blessings we never expected.